The forest was quiet that December morning, the kind of cold silence that settles over rural Georgia when winter finally decides to bite. Sunlight barely reached the ground through the trees, and every breath hung in the air like a fading ghost. It should have been an ordinary day for the hunters walking through the brush. Instead, it became the start of a nightmare. One of them noticed something strange at the bottom of a slope, a shape that did not belong, a color that nature never creates. When he stepped closer, his boots froze in the damp soil. What he found was not the body of an animal. It was a fragment of a human life, discarded and left to rot in the cold. A hand, no name, no story, just a silent scream buried in the dirt. Moments later, police tape began slicing through the quiet woods like a wound. What no one knew then was that this discovery was only the beginning. There were more pieces scattered across the county, more fragments, more horror, as if someone had tried to erase a person completely, and yet, even as investigators stared at the gruesome trail, thinking they were dealing with a stranger, someone else far away already knew whose body it was. Her name was Mindy Cassotus, but her husband, Nick, did not answer the phone that day. For years, their marriage had appeared happy from the outside. A young couple from Georgia, married, dreaming, trying to build a future together. But behind the walls of their home, something darker had been twisting its way into their lives. Nick Cassotus was no ordinary husband. Online, he lived another life, another persona, another identity. Under the name Nick Morfox, he had become one of Reddit's most popular horror writers. His stories were chilling, cinematic, and disturbingly realistic. Millions of readers followed him. One of his stories even went so viral that Sony bought the movie rights. He was admired, celebrated, a rising star in online horror fiction, yet Mindy was the only one who saw the other side of him. It began with small things, warnings, whispers about danger, claims that someone had hacked their phones. Someone was stalking them. Someone was watching the house. Mindy trusted him. Why wouldn't she? He was her husband, her partner, her safe place, or so she believed. But the fear he planted started to grow, shaping every decision. Every dollar, every night spent awake wondering who was out there. Then Nick told her an FBI agent was helping them, a man named Ron, a man who only communicated with Nick, a man no one else ever saw. Mindy never questioned it. She wanted to feel protected. She wanted to believe that Nick was doing everything he could to keep them safe. But there was no stalker. There was no hacker. There was no FBI agent named Ron. And every lie was another brick in the trap Nick was building around her life. As the months passed, Mindy's world became smaller. Her money slowly disappeared. Her trust eroded. Her grip on what was real weakened as Nick fed her fear, twisting her own mind against her, gaslighting her, manipulating her, isolating her. The injustice of it all was invisible, quiet, slow, like poison. Eventually, Mindy's family noticed something was wrong. She became distant, unreadable. She seemed tired in a way that sleep could not fix. But when they asked, she insisted everything was fine. Nick had convinced her that telling anyone would put them in danger. Then came the night when Mindy stopped answering messages entirely. Days passed. Nick claimed she had left the house. He claimed she needed time. He claimed she would return, but he never reported her missing. Meanwhile, the hunter's discovery in the woods forced investigators to piece together the puzzle of a dismembered woman. It took days before dental records confirmed the truth. Mindy was gone, not missing, not hiding, gone. She had not vanished. She had been erased. When detectives finally reached Nick, they found a man strangely calm. A man who answered slowly, as if calculating every word. A man who told a story that felt rehearsed. He said Mindy had been stressed. He said she had talked about leaving. He said he did not know where she went. But investigators already sensed a shadow around him, something cold, something hollow. They were not talking to a grieving husband. They were talking to a man who had built a world of lies for years. A man whose horror stories online mirrored real events far too closely. A man who seemed almost comfortable around tragedy. A man who refused to look at Mindy's mother when she asked what happened. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered the fake FBI agent, the non-existent hackers, the imaginary threats. They found the drained bank accounts, the manipulated messages, the lies stacked on top of lies until there was no truth left standing. Nick was no longer just a suspect. He was the only person in Mindy's life who controlled her world, the last person to see her alive, and the one man who benefited from her silence, but the most chilling detail came from his own writing. Buried in one of his viral horror stories was a scene that described a body hidden in a forest. Not just any forest, the same county, the same layout, the same twisted precision. It was as if he had written the blueprint long before the crime took place. As investigators stared at the story, a cold realization formed. Nick had not just created fiction. He had rehearsed reality, and that was when detectives found something that changed the direction of the case completely. A hidden drive, one that contained drafts of stories he never shared online, stories far more disturbing, stories that read like confessions. One file stood out among the rest. It was titled simply December, and it was the last thing investigators opened before they knew they were dealing with a killer. The hidden drive sat on the evidence table like a quiet bomb, small enough to fit in a pocket, yet heavy enough to destroy everything Nick Cassotus had ever claimed to be. Investigators connected it without a word, knowing that whatever they found inside would either unravel the truth or plunge them even deeper into darkness. The file named December opened with a single sentence. A body is harder to hide than a lie. The words seemed to tremble on the screen, as if they were not typed but breathed onto the page. The room fell silent as detectives read through paragraphs that felt less like fiction and more like a blueprint of fear. The descriptions were methodical, detached. The writer spoke of cold nights and a quiet house, of a woman who trusted too easily, of a forest that swallowed secrets. Every detail mirrored Mindy's final days. It was not a story, it was a shadow of a crime. Investigators felt the weight settle on their chests. Nick had written this months before Mindy vanished. It was as if he had been preparing not just a narrative, but a ritual. A way to rehearse the unthinkable, and yet, when confronted again, he remained emotionless. A man who had lived so long in lies that truth no longer had a place inside him. Outside the interrogation room, the world began piecing together its own version of events. Friends spoke about Mindy's growing paranoia. Family recalled strange messages she forwarded to them, messages supposedly sent by a hacker watching their home, messages that all traced back to one device. Nick's. With each revelation, the line between his fiction and reality blurred further. Investigators noticed something off in his behavior, a kind of detachment, as if he was evaluating the situation rather than reacting to it. He answered questions slowly, not out of grief but calculation, but the real escalation came when detectives finally accessed his Reddit drafts. Hidden among hundreds of horror tales was a story that struck every investigator like a cold slap. A story about a writer whose wife became a burden, whose fears became an excuse, whose disappearance became a plot twist. The parallels were undeniable. Mindy never stood a chance. Her world had been shaped by lies so carefully crafted that she never realized she was living inside a story Nick was authoring, a story he intended to end. Investigators dug further into their digital history. They discovered the fake FBI agent Nick had created, emails written by him, instructions sent to Mindy under the guise of protection, commands that slowly isolated her from everyone she loved. It was a slow suffocation, a psychological cage, a manipulation so deep that even Mindy's closest friends did not know she needed saving. The injustice was suffocating. Detectives found financial records showing money drained from her accounts. Nick had fabricated threats that required them to move funds, change devices, abandon accounts. By the end, everything was under his control. The cracks widened when officers searched the Cassotus home again. In the garage, behind a stack of dusty storage bins, something caught a detective's eye. A faint copper stain on the concrete. When the forensic team arrived, they confirmed what everyone feared: blood. Human, a match for Mindy. The home that once sheltered her had become the first crime scene. But the most chilling discovery came from Nick's car. In the trunk, under the carpet lining, they found traces of soil and plant matter that matched the forest where the hunters made the grisly discovery. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was closing in like a tightening fist. Yet Nick still sat calmly in his chair, hands folded, eyes cold. He insisted Mindy had left. He insisted he was innocent. He insisted everything investigators found was a coincidence. His calmness, however, began to crack when detectives showed him his own writing, scene after scene, paragraph after paragraph. His face did not show guilt. It showed shock, not at the evidence, but at the fact that he had failed to stay ahead of his own story. For the first time, investigators saw the fear shift, not from Mindy, but from Nick. The turning point came when digital forensics discovered a deleted note on his phone. A note written late at night. A note that read like a confession without admitting the crime. She finally stopped asking questions. That was when the investigation hit a new level. Detectives believed Mindy had discovered something in those final days. Something that made her question the lies. Something that pushed Nick into a corner he had built himself, and he lashed out. The escalation reached its peak when police uncovered surveillance footage from a gas station near the forest. A car matching Nick's pulled in at 2 in the morning, no passengers, just Nick stepping out, glancing around, and cleaning the trunk with a calmness that chilled investigators to the bone. He was not panicked. He was not confused. He was efficient. When the footage ended, investigators knew the picture was complete. They were not dealing with a grieving husband blindsided by tragedy. They were dealing with a man who rehearsed his crimes in fiction before carrying them out in reality. A man who believed he could outright justice. But the final twist of Chapter 2 came from someone investigators did not expect. A quiet neighbor who lived across the street. She came forward with something she had been too nervous to report earlier. She had seen Nick the night Mindy disappeared, not standing, not walking, but dragging something heavy from the house to his car under the dim glow of a porch light. Something wrapped, something long, something that never moved. Her voice trembled as she described it, as if speaking the memory out loud made it real again, but the damage was already done. The testimony shattered any illusion Nick had left standing. The truth was finally within reach. The neighbor's quiet testimony settled over the investigation like a final piece snapping into place. It did not roar. It did not explode. It simply confirmed what detectives already knew in their bones. Nick Cassotus was no grieving husband. He was the architect of a horror he believed he could hide behind fiction. With every new detail, the case tightened around him like a slow-closing trap. Nick had spent years building a world of lies. Now the truth was catching up. Investigators reconstructed the timeline of Mindy's final night with painstaking precision. The garage, the blood, the forest, the trunk, the surveillance footage, every piece aligned into a single, devastating arc. A narrative he could no longer control. It was ironic. The writer who manipulated stories to his advantage was about to lose the one story that mattered most, the story he could not rewrite, the story that revealed him. Behind the scenes, forensic analysts worked through the night. They matched soil samples, recovered deleted files, pulled GPS data showing Nick's phone traveling the exact route to the forest at the exact time Mindy vanished. His world of fiction was colliding violently with the world of evidence, and the evidence was winning. The turning point came when investigators pulled data from the draft file named December. Hidden deep within the metadata, they found something Nick never anticipated. A timestamp from the night Mindy disappeared. The document had been opened, edited, saved, as if he could not resist giving his horror story one more rewrite while the real terror unfolded inside their home. This was not carelessness. It was compulsion. The same compulsion that made him believe he could create a reality as simple as typing words on a screen. But reality had finally turned against him. Detectives presented everything in a final confrontation. Nick sat in the interrogation room, hands folded the same way he always had, but his eyes betrayed him. They shifted, flickered, stumbled, not with remorse, not with fear, but with the unsettling realization that the script he had written for himself was gone. For the first time, he was no longer the narrator. He was the villain. Outside the room, Mindy's family gathered as investigators walked them through the findings. They listened in shaking silence. They had spent months living on hope. Hope that Mindy was alive. Hope that she might return. Hope that this nightmare had an explanation that did not involve betrayal. But the truth was colder than winter soil. Mindy had been trapped long before she died. Her mind manipulated, her choices controlled, her world shaped by threats that never existed. Yet in those final days, the power reversal began. She started asking questions Nick could not answer, questions that threatened the illusion he had crafted for years. And that was when he turned the story into something irreversible. The tragedy was heavy, but justice was closer than ever. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence and moved fast. Nick Cassotus was charged with murder, fraud, deception, and the desecration of human remains. The public watched the story unfold with horror. A beloved Reddit horror writer, a rising talent, a man whose stories had captivated millions. Now the world saw the truth. His stories had always been confessions disguised as fiction. During the trial, the courtroom became a chamber of shadows. The prosecution laid out the narrative piece by piece. The manipulation, the lies, the staged threats, the fake FBI agent, the financial draining. The isolated victim, who never realized she was living inside a trap. Screens lit up with his stories as jurors read through the chilling passages. Scenes he wrote, scenes he lived, scenes that matched Mindy's final moments too closely to ignore. Detectives testified about the evidence from his car, his home, his devices. Forensic analysts detailed the blood patterns and soil matches. Digital experts walked through the date to trail he thought he had erased. Every word hammered another nail into the coffin of his innocence. But the most powerful moment came when Mindy's mother took the stand, her voice soft, her hands shaking. She spoke about Mindy's kindness, her trust, her belief that Nick was protecting her. The injustice of it brought the courtroom to a breathless silence, and that silence turned into something stronger: resolve, conviction, justice. It took the jury only a few hours. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Nick showed no reaction, no anger, no remorse. He stared straight ahead, as if mentally rewriting the scene in his head, searching for a version where he still controlled the story. But that version did not exist anymore. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The world that once celebrated him now saw him clearly, not a writer, not a creator, but a manipulator who used fiction as practice for reality. A man who rehearsed cruelty before enacting it. When he entered the prison gates, he stepped into a world he could not control with words, a world where every lie he ever crafted was meaningless. But Mindy's story did not end there. Her family established a foundation in her name, a foundation dedicated to helping victims of manipulation, coercion, and psychological abuse. Her memory became a force stronger than Nick's lies, stronger than his stories, stronger than the darkness he tried to bury her in. The crime that began with horror ended with purpose. The forest where hunters found her fragments was cleaned and marked with a memorial stone, a simple inscription carved into the granite. She trusted the wrong storyteller. Visitors often say the air feels heavier near that stone, not sad, not haunted, but powerful, as if the truth itself lingers there. A truth Nick could never erase. In the end, his downfall was poetic. The writer who built a world of lies was undone by the oldest truth in the world. Justice always finds its way, and the final image is this: a winter forest, a silent memorial stone, a story no longer written by a killer, but remembered by the world he tried to deceive.